In a courtroom filled with polished wood and cold silence, a woman sat across from the man who once vowed to love her. As she lowered her head, fighting to hide the pain, he smirked, mocking her in front of the very judge who would decide their future. To him, the divorce papers were nothing but a victory, a final insult toward the black woman he believed had no power left. But what neither he nor anyone else in that room expected was the moment the judge unfolded a document that would turn the entire case upside down: her late father's will. The courtroom air carried a heaviness that could not be ignored. Every polished bench, every echo of footsteps on the tiled floor, seemed to weigh against her as she prepared to face the man she once trusted. She had given years of her life to the marriage, years of sacrifice and quiet endurance, only to find herself seated here, fighting not just for dignity but for the fragments of a future that still belonged to her. Across from her, the man leaned back in his chair, confidence oozing from every gesture. He believed the outcome was already written in his favor. To him, this wasn't just a divorce. It was his chance to humiliate her publicly, to prove that she was powerless without him. His mocking laughter and smug glances carried an unspoken message. He wanted her to feel small. But the judge, a man known for his calm authority, sat silently, observing everything. His expression revealed nothing, yet his hands rested on a set of documents that carried far more weight than the divorce papers being signed. Among those documents lay a hidden truth, a will drafted years ago by the woman's late father. What made this moment even heavier was the quiet history behind it all. Her father had been a man of quiet resilience, someone who had endured prejudice and injustice his entire life, but never stopped believing in fairness. He had left behind more than just possessions. He had left behind a legacy, one that her estranged husband could never have anticipated. As she tried to steady her breathing, she had no idea that the tables were about to turn. This divorce, meant to strip her of everything, would soon reveal the power her father had carefully placed in her hands. The proceedings moved forward with a pace that felt deliberately cruel. Each document slid across the polished wooden table seemed like another reminder of everything she had lost. The marriage that once held promise had crumbled into a spectacle of arrogance, and her husband reveled in every second of it. His laughter was low, sharp, and filled with mockery. He tapped his pen on the desk as if signing away their bond was nothing more than a game, an opportunity to flaunt his control. For her, every stroke of the pen was a silent wound. She kept her eyes lowered, not because she was weak, but because meeting his gaze meant confronting the smirk that had haunted her through the worst of their marriage. The courtroom lights, bright and unforgiving, made every sigh and nervous movement more visible. Whispers among the few spectators only deepened the sense of exposure. She was not just a woman ending a marriage, she was being put on display, her pain made into entertainment. The man's attitude carried an edge of something darker than arrogance. He had always resented her strength, her ability to rise above challenges. And now in this public setting, he intended to strip that away. His mockery wasn't only about the divorce, it was about her identity, about diminishing her as a black woman, reinforcing the cruel stereotypes he had often hidden behind closed doors. Every chuckle, every exaggerated sigh was a reminder that he wanted her to feel lesser, to feel as though the world around them agreed with him. Yet the judge's silence remained unbroken. His steady gaze swept from one party to the other, pausing briefly on the man's smug expression, then returning to the woman's trembling hands. In that quiet, it almost seemed as though the room itself was holding its breath. On his desk rested not just the divorce papers, but a sealed folder containing the will that no one in the room had yet mentioned aloud. The woman's mind drifted for a moment to her late father. She remembered his words of encouragement during her childhood, his lessons about dignity in the face of injustice. He had often reminded her that silence did not mean weakness, that patience often revealed truths others could not see. And though he was gone, his presence felt near, almost as if he were watching from the same benches where the spectators now sat. The husband, however, was blind to any of this. He leaned closer, speaking just loudly enough for those nearby to hear, his tone dripping with ridicule. He wanted her discomfort to be seen, wanted it to become the memory people carried when they thought of her. To him, the divorce was final. To him, she had already lost. But within the air inside the courtroom thickened as the judge finally reached for the sealed folder, resting at the edge of his desk. His movements were deliberate, steady, each second dragging the room deeper into silence. Even the husband, once so smug, straightened slightly in his chair, curious about the sudden shift in the judge's focus. The judge cleared his throat, his voice carrying a gravity that silenced the last whispers in the room. He announced that before finalizing the divorce proceedings, an additional matter needed to be addressed, one connected to the estate of the woman's late father. The words landed heavily, drawing immediate confusion from the husband, whose smirk faltered into a frown. Slowly, the judge began to read. Line by line, the will unfolded into something far more powerful than anyone expected. Her father, a man who had lived with dignity despite countless injustices, had carefully prepared for this very moment. The will revealed substantial assets, property, savings, and investments that were to be passed directly to his daughter. Not only that, but it clearly stipulated protections ensuring that no spouse, past or present, could lay claim to her inheritance. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The husband's mocking expression collapsed into disbelief, his face draining of color as the reality sank in. The very woman he had sought to humiliate now stood revealed as the rightful heir to a legacy that far outshone his shallow attempts at dominance. For the woman, the words were more than just legal declarations. They were echoes of her father's love, his final act of protection, and his belief in her strength. She sat upright, her trembling steadied, her presence in the room transformed. The judge's voice grew firmer as he concluded, making it clear that not only would the divorce proceed, but the husband had no claim to her father's estate. The mockery that had filled the room minutes earlier was gone, replaced by stunned silence. In that moment, the balance shifted completely. The man who sought to strip her of dignity was left powerless, and the woman who had endured his cruelty now carried her father's legacy as a shield, a reminder that justice sometimes arrives when least expected. Judge's quiet composure lay the weight of revelation. He knew what the sealed folder contained, and he knew it would alter not only the outcome of this divorce, but the very balance of power between the two seated before him. What began as a cruel game in the eyes of the husband was slowly becoming something far greater. And while she sat there, unaware of the storm about to unfold, the scales of justice quietly began to shift in her favor. As the judge's final words echoed through the courtroom, the silence that followed was deafening. The man who once strutted with arrogance now sat frozen, his pen idle, his smirk erased. He had walked into the room certain of victory, convinced he would leave with her spirit broken. Instead, he had been confronted with a truth he could never have imagined. The very woman he mocked was shielded by a legacy he could not touch. The woman inhaled deeply, her chest rising with a strength she hadn't felt in years. For so long, she had endured quietly, surviving the sharp edges of ridicule and dismissal. Yet here she was, her father's love and foresight rising like a wall of protection around her. It wasn't wealth that gave her power in that moment, but the reminder that she was never as powerless as her husband tried to make her believe. Spectators who had watched the mockery unfold now shifted in their seats, their expressions softened. What they had witnessed was more than a divorce. It was the quiet triumph of dignity over cruelty, of resilience over arrogance. The husband's downfall wasn't measured in money or documents. It was measured in the emptiness of his laughter, stripped of the dominance he thought he owned. When she stood to leave, her steps were steady, her posture upright. She no longer carried the weight of shame he had tried to place upon her shoulders. Instead, she carried the echo of her father's voice, the legacy of a man who had believed in justice even in a world that often denied it. Outside the courtroom doors, the sun spilled across the steps, warm and unrelenting. And as she walked into its light, the story became clear. Cruelty may seek to diminish, but dignity endures. And so the question lingers. How many times have we mistaken silence for weakness only to learn that within it rests a strength far greater than arrogance could ever imagine?